This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good afternoon, and we're coming to you live from Parkland, Florida at this hour, the scene of that deadly high school shooting, and we're interrupting regularly scheduled programming to bring you breaking news. Authorities here before the cameras again in Parkland to update us on the shooting, where the investigation is now revealing. We've been told we might expect a more detailed timeline of the attack. In the meantime, here's what we know at this hour. 17 people are dead, at least 15 injured. Several of the injured are fighting for their lives. The suspect, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, is expected in court this afternoon. But we want to take you to a news conference that began just moments ago with the first officer to come upon the suspect. It is Officer Michael Leonard of a neighboring community. When he decided to join the search for that suspect, he described what it was like coming upon it. Let's listen.
I was the first officer to make contact with the suspect. Spelling of my name is Michael, last name Leonard. City of Coconut Creek. It's a neighboring city right next to Coral Springs, Parkland. Just to give you a little insight as to what happened in my day, is that I was at the police department headquarters in Coconut Creek when the call came out. I decided to come over and help in any way that I could. When I arrived to the area, there was a heavy presence of officers, emergency personnel, and I decided to expand my search for this individual that was still on the loose. We'd been given information via the radio as to what he had been wearing. This information was provided through the radio dispatch. I decided to travel in some of the residential areas located near the school. And as I traveled down one of the back roads, it's a heavily residential area, I happened to come across, it was just myself. There was not a lot of people out, a couple people walking their dogs in the area. As I continued down this roadway, I discovered an individual walking on the sidewalk that was wearing the clothing description that had been given over the radio. He looked like a typical high school student, and for a quick moment, I thought, could this be the person? Is this who I need to stop? Training kicked in. I pulled my vehicle over immediately, engaged the suspect. He complied with my commands and was taken into custody without any issues.
Did you have his weapon with him?
I can't comment on that. This is an investigation still ongoing. I'd just like to take this time right now to express my gratitude for my brothers and sisters in law enforcement, emergency services that have put all their heart and soul into this. This is what we train for. We hope this never happens. But I just want to thank them. I want to thank them for all their services and everything that they do. And my condolences to the family that have loved ones that have been lost. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Frank Babinec. Last name spelled Babinec. I'm the fire chief for the Coral Springs Parkland Fire Department. Before I start off with how this went for us yesterday, I'd like to tell all the residents of Parkland and Coral Springs that, from all the men and women of our department, that we are very sorry for what they're going through. Our firefighters share in their grief. They feel for them. They feel with them. We are part of the community, and we are here to protect them during the event, and we will be here to protect them after the event. Yesterday, just before 2:30 p.m., we received a call for a possible active shooter event at Stoneman Douglas High School. As we started our response, we really weren't sure if this was a real event or not. We get calls like this once in a while, and they turn out to be non-real calls, which is a good thing. But as we began to respond, we got more and more information that made this more and more real for us. Myself, along with several other chief officers and fire personnel, were responding to the scene. As we got to the scene, we had to set up an appropriate command post and triage area to deal with the amount of possible patients that we were going to have. As we approached the scene and got set up, we got some information that there may be patients on the west side of the building. So I went around to investigate that, where we did locate one victim and removed them from that area, and I returned to the command post. I can tell you that all the first responders train for events like this. We hope we never have to use it. We hope we never have to use that training. This is a horrible event. But I'm very, very proud of all of the firefighter paramedics, all the first responders, the ER folks, everybody that treated these patients did it with such a high level of professionalism and readiness that I cannot say enough about. I want to thank you guys for allowing this opportunity, and our firefighters can never, our first responders can never unsee what they saw yesterday. So we will work with them to make sure they get the resources they need to get through this as part of the community. Thank you.
So there you hear authorities on the scene just moments ago. That's the Coral Springs Fire Department and, of course, Michael Leonard, Officer Leonard, who acknowledged before the cameras that he was the first officer from a neighboring community who actually came upon that suspect, asking to himself, could this be the student? And we now know that he left those buildings with all of the other students who were leaving the school campus, tried to blend in with them, and it was some hour or so before he was actually discovered. That suspect, of course, is Nicholas Cruz, 19 years old, and we do have images from just a short time ago actually in court this afternoon for a bond hearing. We learned several things from this hearing. In addition to already being charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder, they also talked in court about some of his history. We know that he lost his father when he was young. He lost his mother recently to the flu, it's believed. The public defender also talked about a history of mental illness. He talked about a possible diagnosis of autism, said that would be looked into. The court also acknowledged that there could be additional charges coming. They said that the suspect is on suicide watch. It is believed that he has communicated, perhaps given some sort of statement to authorities, though all he did in court was acknowledge that that, in fact, was his name. Also this afternoon, we have an image coming in of the assault rifle that authorities found. They believe this obviously was the weapon used, an AR-15 used in the attack. The weapon was purchased, we now know, legally. The sprawling campus of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, where the shooting took place, is now closed today and tomorrow. I just spent a lot of time this afternoon with a fairly large group of students who survived this. They talked about the horror inside those hallways, that the gunman went down the hallway shooting into the windows that were beside the classroom doors, describing the horror of those scenes, watching their students drop next to them in some of those classrooms. And I have to tell you, as I bring in our Chief Justice Correspondent, Pierre Thomas, watching this with me, Pierre, these students, though young, they're juniors and seniors in high school, they talked about mental health, but they also talked about weapons, saying that our lawmakers in Washington, and they were very strong with their opinions, these students saying our school is just the latest school, and now they know what it's like, and they have expectations that something will be done to try to keep these shootings from happening. And you're learning more about the weapon, and that he did find that weapon. He did, in fact, purchase it legally.
That's right, David. He bought this weapon legally from a federally licensed gun dealer. Passed with flying colors. The gun dealer, we're being told, did everything by the book. Nothing in his record indicated that he would have been a threat, at least in terms of a criminal record at that point. But David, as you point out, there were all these different red flags that were known to people. Students talking about him, talking about violence. We heard the superintendent today discussing the fact that he was a person who had issues, who had been getting support and counseling. The FBI today acknowledged that there was a YouTube posting that they were made aware of, in which the suspect allegedly said, or someone with a name like his, the notion that he wanted to become a professional school shooter. The FBI said they could not identify him, David, and did not take additional action as far as we know. But clearly, those students understand that we are seeing more and more of these kinds of incidents. And David, striking that they knew what to do in terms of run, hide, seek support is remarkable.
Not only is it striking, Pierre, it's also a sign of the times, and the students talked about that. They knew that they'd already had a drill earlier in the day, a fire drill, that when this alarm went off, they thought that there was something odd about that, but that they had been trained what a code red was. That's what they heard from authorities after that second alarm was flipped off, and now they understand that the suspect, it's believed, actually set off that second alarm late in the afternoon to try to get people into the hallways so that he could take aim. A staggering number. This was the 18th school shooting by one count at a school just this year, and obviously we're just about halfway through February. We're going to have team coverage tonight on World News Tonight, and if news warrants, we will break back on if we learn anything more from the sheriff about the timeline or about the people who are still at the hospital here in this community fighting for their lives. In the meantime, I'm David Muir. I'll see you with the entire team tonight, 6:30 Eastern for World News Tonight. Until then, have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Hey guys, Amna Nawaz here live in New York, continuing coverage now with the latest we're learning from officials down in Florida on the site of that deadly high school shooting in Parkland yesterday. We just got an update from some officials on the ground, including hearing from the officer who actually first encountered the suspect in this case, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz. Let's bring in my colleague Rick Klein, who's down in Washington, D.C., is keeping an eye on all the developments with us. And Rick, we're hearing now sort of a timeline being put together by law enforcement officials down there. Every time there are more details shared, it sounds like there were some red flags that were missed along the way.
I think that's exactly right. And as we learn more, you learn more opportunities that people may have had to try to identify this. And it becomes clear that it's a systemic failure, but it's also a very particular failure with one particular young man who was displaying all sorts of warning signs, and yet they were not being heeded. And I think that, Amna, that complicates the policy discussion in some ways, because you can have bipartisan condemnation of the fact that this individual was not identified, but you can also have a broader discussion about what else can be done to try to keep guns away from people like him, to try to keep the kind of protections that are in place around guns in place. And I think it just makes, it adds a texture and a layer to all of this. I think in the immediate aftermath, people look for answers, and I think they split down partisan lines. I think what you're seeing everyone say universally is that we know in a situation like this is someone that should not have had a gun in his hands.
And one of those places they're looking for answers is to the White House itself. That's where we go now for our senior White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega. Cecilia, we heard the president speak earlier, obviously offering his condolences, his sympathies, telling people in Florida, we are with you to give you whatever you need now. We just heard from David Muir, too, saying students on the ground say they want to see action out of Washington. Where is the White House on this now?
Well, as the president was wrapping up his remarks to the nation today, Amna, one of the reporters that was in that room shouted a question at him and asked, will you do something about guns? And the president didn't answer and kept on walking. It's not that anybody expected him to stop and answer that question right then and there. Certainly, the White House would argue that that's neither the time nor the place. But, that has long been the answer from this White House, is to say that it's just never the time or the place, it seems. So in the days after one of these mass shootings, consistently, they have said it is too soon to talk about that if there is an investigation going on. And it will be interesting to see in the days and the weeks to come how they handle that, if that is the call from on the ground there from students. In the wake of one of the president's tweets today where he offered condolences to the students in Florida, a student fired back and said, I don't want your condolences, do something instead of sending prayers. And this is a rallying cry that we've been hearing with more and more frequency in the wake of some of these mass shootings. Instead of talking about gun control and gun laws, this president wants to focus on mental health. And that is also something that we are hearing echoed from the delegation in Florida, that they want to see lawmakers tackle this issue. But for President Trump, using mental health has been a way, many people would say, for him to not address the issue and the questions about gun control. One of the only actions that this White House has taken on I should say one of the main actions this White House has taken on gun control legislation was to block an Obama-era rule that made it illegal, made it much harder, I should say, for the mentally ill to obtain weapons. And so these are the questions that this White House, this administration will certainly be facing as these conversations around this country move on. Perhaps this is the shooting that will spark a conversation here in Washington. We will see.
And Cecilia, that one point you made is something I do want to highlight. We've had some colleagues reporting out this fact that there was this rule in place that would have potentially blocked someone like this young man from buying this kind of weapon, that this administration ended that rule. And I know that's just recently reported. Have we heard anything from the White House about that decision?
No, and I'm not surprised. I mean, this isn't something that they would want to talk about now. When it was signed months ago, this is something that happened with little fanfare. I will tell you, having experienced some of the social media backlash in the last few hours for mentioning this earlier today, a lot of people are pointing out that the ACLU was also opposed to this. So that is the argument that many pro-Second Amendment people are talking about this morning. So, but look, I mean, it boils down to this. At some point, someone in either party is going to have to do something about this in this city. There are a lot of proposals out there. The problem is no one can agree what the answer is.
Cecilia Vega live at the White House for us. For more on that and where we might see some potential action, let's head over to Capitol Hill. Our senior congressional correspondent, Mary Bruce, joins us live there. And Mary, obviously we saw earlier on the Senate, they held a moment of silence in remembrance of those 17 lives lost yesterday, the vast majority of them high school students. What are we hearing from anyone in Congress? It obviously already has a very full plate of things that they need to get done this week about the potential for moving forward on this issue.
Look, Amna, unfortunately, the response up here on Capitol Hill is one that has become all too familiar, and it's a response that seems to be leading nowhere, just to more inaction. There's already, even though we are still less than 24 hours after this latest horrific mass shooting, that sense of inaction is already palpable up here in the halls of Capitol Hill. I've talked with members all morning long on both sides of the aisle, and while everyone agrees something has to be done, that's really where the agreement stops. You're seeing the parties sort of decamp to their corners. You have mostly Democrats who are calling for stricter gun control laws. You have Republicans saying this is an issue of mental health. But even within those corners, you aren't hearing a lot of coalescing around actual specific action that can be taken here on Capitol Hill. I had a long conversation with Republican Florida Senator Marco Rubio about what can come next, because, of course, we've been hearing from his own constituents throughout the day, throughout these last 24 hours, saying enough is enough, that Washington has to act. And Rubio said, look, he agrees that something has to be done, but he's just not sure what that is right now. I pressed him on the issue of mental health, whether they need stricter mental health laws, given all of the red flags that seem to have been raised about the alleged shooter. And he said, possibly that's one area that they should be looking at. But he also noted that's a lot of that falls onto the state. Asked if he thinks gun control, stricter gun controls are the answer here. He sort of shrugged and said that none of the laws on the table or none of the possible options being considered would have changed anything. Now, that's not necessarily true, and that is certainly not how many Democrats see it. You have Senator Dianne Feinstein calling for an assault weapons ban that would have banned AR-15s, like the weapon that was used by the gunman down in Florida. You have those calling for action on what's known as bump stocks, that device that was used in the Las Vegas shooting. So there are some things that are being discussed up here, but again, the political will to actually get anything done. Once again, you're hearing a lot of talk up here, but not a lot of optimism about actual action. Amna.
And Rick Klein, let me bring you to the conversation here with Mary, because we talked about this a little bit earlier too. That political will, where does it potentially end? Where is the line you think that needs to be crossed? Because we saw a map earlier about how many states have now been affected by mass shootings, not just in schools, but mass shootings. What do you think it might take for there to be political will to actually get something done?
I think it's bigger than the conversation that's often had, which is holding up the power of the NRA. Yes, the NRA is very influential. Yes, the fear of the NRA is substantial. But the flip side is that the fear of gun control advocates, people that want more limitations on gun ownership, is almost non-existent. And to my mind, the political question is when that flips, when that starts to change. when this becomes a voting issue for people, when people will say, because you know it in polling, you know that people tell pollsters all the time they want more gun controls, they want things like the assault weapons ban that Dianne Feinstein is advocating, they want universal background checks, they want to ban bump stocks, all of that's a given. They're not voting that way. They're not voting out people who disagree with them the same way that people on the other side of the issue, people more aligned with gun owners and the NRA, are acting. So I think there has to be a change in voting behavior that starts to change the makeup of Congress. It's not about external events. It's about internalizing those events, and it's about making it a call to action. And I think until that happens, unfortunately, you could have these happen all the time, and I don't think you're going to change the political calculus for a whole lot of members of Congress.
And in the meantime, it's worth pointing out that weapon that was used in this shooting, the AR-15, was purchased legally. Let's bring in our Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas, who's also down in our Washington, D.C. bureau. Pierre, we're learning a little bit more about this weapon. Can you tell us what investigators know so far, where else they're looking, and also anything we know about how the suspect himself has been cooperating?
Well, the information we have is that it was an AR-15 assault-style rifle. Purchased legally at a federally licensed gun store in somewhere in Florida, we believe. Suspect had no criminal background to speak of. Sale went through with flying colors. The gun dealer did everything by the book, is what we're being told. So, again, the question now becomes, given the other red flag, given the fact that he had allegedly told students about things he wanted to do in terms of violence, given the fact that there's this YouTube posting that the FBI acknowledged that they were told about, but said that they could never really figure out who that person was. You know, how can you have a person with all these red flags be able to buy that weapon and then go and kill all those people?
And Pierre, there's also another bit of reporting now we have just from the Anti-Defamation League saying that they have information potentially linking this suspect to a white supremacist group. How would that, if that's proven to be credible, play into the investigation?
Well, again, law enforcement officials, when they hear of information like that, it will get checked out. Because one of the things they want to make absolutely certain of is whether he had any accomplices or not. So that kind of information will be followed through. Clearly, this was a troubled young man, susceptible to all different types of influences. And law enforcement now will try to embark upon finding everything they can about him so they can do a post-action report that will inform others in law enforcement, in the mental health field, of what to look for.
Pierre Thomas, live in our D.C. bureau there. Mary Bruce, let me go back to you and give you the last word on this here, because you're talking to these members of Congress all the time. As you mentioned, you pressed some of them earlier on how far they might be willing to go or what they want to see happen. Look, Rick mentioned this earlier, too, that if the emotions in the reaction die down, if the outcry dies down, this just goes away. The conversation fades away until the next event happens. If it's to be carried forward at all in Congress, do you think there's potential for movement? Who would be the people on the front lines of that?
Yeah, and unfortunately, we have seen this over and over and over again. And as I think many have been discussing, certainly up here on the Hill and elsewhere, if they couldn't get action after Sandy Hook, after that horrific shooting with so many children, what is it going to take to get action out of Congress? And Rick is absolutely right that it's going to take some kind of political push coming from voters. And of course, all of this conversation right now is happening as Congress is gearing up to get ready to head into the midterms, which makes it, I think, even harder for lawmakers to really push on this issue unless they see their constituents driving this conversation. Now, the main players, as you mentioned, are the same as they usually are. You know, you have Dianne Feinstein pushing for these changes, for some kind of change on the assault weapon ban, on bump stocks, changes that many others would say are common sense changes. That's how Democrats view it. You have Republicans pushing for changes on the mental health side. I had one top Republican tell us earlier today that, look, this wasn't a matter of people. This isn't about people with guns. This is about an idiot, he said, who got a gun, and preventing people from being able to gain access to these kinds of weapons if they have red flags about their mental state. But overall, the one thing that both sides do share up here is frustration. They know that this reflects poorly upon Congress, the fact that every time there is another mass shooting, and they happen far too often, unfortunately, that the nation looks to Washington and says, what are you going to do? And once again, unfortunately, Washington's answer, it appears, is going to be nothing.
And that frustration is clearly being felt across the entire country right now. Mary Bruce, live for us on Capitol Hill. Thanks. Thanks to all of you for watching as well. Head over to abcnews.com anytime. We'll keep you up to date on the latest coming out of that deadly Florida shooting yesterday right there. Download the ABC News app. We'll send you those breaking news headlines and updates right to your phone. For now, I'm Amna Nawaz, and I'll see you back here soon.